Okay, good evening everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name's Matt Roberts and I've co-convened the Her Art Story Talks programme with my colleague Eleanor Moreton Griffiths. She's very kindly offered to wait on the door and show people in, so she'll be with us shortly. Her Art Story is a pilot programme of 4 talks taking place in London, Greater London and the South East in November and December. Myself and Laura have approached the Arts Council and thankfully gained support from the National Lottery Project grants to host a series of conversations with established women artists and arts professionals about their practice, their career and their experience to date. Eleanor, we're very proud to be working with Cathy and Eleanor this evening. Please feel free, we will have a section reserved at the end for questions, and I will also be recording the event, so hopefully I'll be able to send you a link to that and you'll be able to revisit it at a later date. I just have a couple of technical things I'd like to say. For those of you who may need the bathroom, there's facilities upstairs on the left-hand side through a gate and turn right, and it's just there. We have fire exits placed just to the left-hand side of the screen, up the stairs where you came from, at my left-hand side of the screen. Upstairs, the main exit where you entered from, and there's an assembly point at Bedwell House, which is basically turn right and past the traffic lights. Hopefully we won't need it. I also wanted to throw forward Block 336 are very kindly hosting us this evening. It's a fantastic space. You know, we love coming to exhibitions and collaborating where we can. There's an event on the 10th of November. It's December, sorry, nearly. It's a filming of an event by the artist Oriana Fox. It's an evening event, it's very interesting. Please visit the website for more details. Okay, so thanks again, and I'll hand over to Cathy and Eleanor.
Thanks, Matt. Just wondering if you want to come forward, if anybody wants to come forward a bit more, like the front row. You don't have to, I'm just thinking, you all seem very far away. But if you feel like it, just do, otherwise that's fine. You don't have to. Shall we move this on, just to give us a sense of when it gets to the end, it's comes out of the programme. Okay, you need to go back here. Anyway, yeah. I know what to do. It's okay. Thanks. That feels a bit better. I'll try and talk loud enough. If you can't hear, just tell me, and I'll shout louder. And if anybody does have anything they want to ask while we're talking, do just join in. But there will be questions at the end as well, of course. So, Eleanor, thank you for being here.
Thank you for asking me.
What shall we start off with in our great conversation?
Well, you mentioned something about, the image, didn't you, when you, tyranny of the image?
Oh, yes, yes, I was very interested in this idea that I thought I'd remembered Eleanor talking about as the tyranny of realism, but actually we think it was a tyranny of the image, and it's something that's really stayed with me. And what I understood it to mean was, as a figurative painter, when you're trying to make a painting, you obviously don't want to exactly reproduce what you're referring to, but it keeps kind of pulling you closer. Is that what you were thinking of?
That definitely happens. I think it was something I had found myself when I, at a certain point, maybe about 2004, I was really wondering what made a compelling image. And the way I went about trying to find this out was I began trawling through images that had sort of grabbed me, and many of them were images from my childhood, illustrations from books and things like that. And I wanted to work out what were the mechanics of these images, why they grabbed me the way they did. And so I began working from them, like many of us do. And it's what you say, that it's not so much necessarily that realism was grabbing me back. It was that I was finding it really hard to know how to make these compelling images my own.
Yes.
They have this kind of dictatorial presence. And then I, having observed that and wrestling constantly, it took a very long time to begin to be able to make my mark against those. I began to realise that for me the practice of painting, that was a lot about what it was an attempt to be myself in the world, in a world that maybe had kind of dictated certain things to me. So in fact it became a kind of metaphor. The image became a metaphor for the expectations I felt were on me.
Right.
That came from sort of further afield, really.
So your images that you were drawn to, these compelling images, they didn't just come from one source?
No, all over the place.
So you gathered together from disparate sources?
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So did you ever identify what it was about an image that made it interesting?
I can't say that I kind of ended up with... I think at that time I noticed that there was a certain kind of image, which I suppose we would think of now as an image associated with Romanticism, where you are looking outwards and perhaps, two characters are looking... Friedrich, Caspar David Friedrich was doing it, you're behind this character's looking out into a wide vista. And I remembered I had this childhood dream where my brother and I would run into the television set where there was a huge cornfield, and we'd run off through the television set, and this was like my idea of heaven, So there was often this sense of a boy and a girl. There was often a boy and a girl, but always this sense of an openness that was in front of us, sort of a freedom. And interestingly enough, I was listening to a talk the other day about the vagus nerve. I don't know if anyone knows the vagus nerve.
No, where is it?
Well, it's amazing. It's this nerve that goes from the back of the head all the way down through the body. And it's vast. And it's only recently really people have really been able to examine it. And it's responsible for our sense of well-being. So there are all sorts of ways in which you tone your vagus nerve, like deep breathing, meditating, dancing, singing, looking people in the eye, getting a lovely smile back. All these things tone your vagus nerve. And in this talk, this researcher out in America was particularly looking at how the experience of awe tones the vagus nerve. Now that's the first time I've come across this, and I'm quite interested in looking further. So what in art has been called the sublime, this thing of looking out this is actually an experience which now they can say this is what it's actually doing.
So it does actually give you a sense of well-being, looking at being in the Grand Canyon. Or something.
Yes.
That's so interesting, isn't it? I think that seems very different from, I can appreciate those beautiful landscapes and vistas with people in them, but I think the images that I am drawn to tend to be well, it tends to be about the people in them. I'm drawn to the people more directly. I feel like
Yes.
zooming right in and getting as close to them as I can somehow.
It's vagus nerve stuff, though.
Is it?
It is still, because you're there.
Because I want to look in their eyes.
Yes.
Yeah, I suppose so. So it's all down to the vagus nerve.
For me, that's what it is now, just for the moment. But you have got this, you've been more and more drawn into working with film images.
Yes. Yes. I think actually it's funny because I feel like it's a relatively recent thing looking at film images, but actually when I was looking back over some older work, I realised that some of the very first paintings I made after I did my BA were actually from films. So it's sort of something that started then, I guess, and it's developed. But it just seems, I think, there is just so much imagery in films. When I watch a film, I'm constantly kind of like that.
Yeah.
At the amazing imagery that has been created, and I want to grab it.
There's a sense, isn't there, when you a painter, at least that's my experience, of actually devouring.
Yes.
It's all. I was thinking the other day what an amazingly sensual thing painting is, compared, even if you compare it with other disciplines, and that sense of ingesting. I think if you work from images, that's another thing I remember experiencing. That I was working from an image, and I was thinking, why am I working from this image? And I thought, actually, I just want to be there. I just want to be there, but I wouldn't really want to be there because that would be problematic. So, in a way, you consume the essence of the thing, don't you, by working from it?
Definitely, and zooming in on faces. Actually, the image I've got up there at the moment, you can't really see the face, but zooming in on faces, it's sort of almost like becoming that person.
Yes.
Merging with them somehow while you're making making the painting of the face.
It is like a closeness, isn't there? And you're spending time with this person to the point when they kind of become you.
I was thinking about the idea of painting from images. So you do have the source material that has already been picked out by somebody, has already been framed in some way. And that idea of reproductions and copying or cover version, all those sorts of ideas that come into play. And I heard a film director talking on the film show on Radio 4, Luca Guadagnino, who's just made a remake of the film Suspiria, which is an Italian horror film, and he's just made his own version of it. And it's been critically quite cool, the reception to it. I think people feel like there's not much point in it, but he was talking about remakes, and he said this really interesting thing in that he thinks a remake is an anti-capitalist act. And I was like, oh, I like the sound of this. And basically what he's thinking about is that capitalism makes us want new things all the time, continually. I think he used the example of clothes and fashion, where, every 6 months you have to buy something new because the things you have already look old. So you have to go and buy something you don't really need. And capitalism is always kind of trying to encourage us that things we have are obsolete, we need new. And he thinks that by remaking, you are actually kind of putting up some kind of resistance to that.
What do you think?
Well, I think it's a slightly tenuous argument, but kind of interesting. But I do think, they do say there are only so many stories, aren't there, that everything sort of has its basis in a certain number of stories, and maybe there are only a certain number of different ways that people can look, and there is some kind of repetition that is going on.
Is that in the show that I saw at Transition recently?
Yeah.
when you had a lovely section of small pieces,
Yes.
each with a detail. I don't think many of them, if any of them, had the star's face, but
No.
but you got this sense of the very small things that were making. There was a kind of repetition to it,
Yes.
which is a minimalist device, isn't it? That
Yeah.
the repetition, and then the small details of the way a button was or something like that.
Yeah. Well, the show, which was called A Gown by Ori Kelly, and Ori Kelly's a Hollywood costume designer. And the idea, well, our idea was I was collaborating with an artist called Alex Nichon. We were thinking about how in film a costume can be used to convey the character. Oh, go the other way. Oh, you see.
What did it
No, it's
roll?
fine, it's fine.
You can get it out. Sorry.
In a film, the detail can convey the character. So, a certain kind of button or a certain colour might mean that that character is, I don't know, angry or
Yes.
fastidious or whatever it is. So, in that series of paintings, I was kind of trying to hone in on those details. But of course, it doesn't really make any sense because you don't have the bigger picture.
No.
It was a kind of fetish.
They really did do that. They really made that as a sort of symbolism.
Yeah.
A garment with symbolism.
Oh, I can't. Oh, yeah, there we go.
Sorry.
That's all right. Don't worry. We'll, I don't really have any of those. These are some of paintings. There's an ongoing series of paintings I make called Film Diaries. So I make a painting from every film I watch. Just a small. They're sort of just bigger than A4 on paper. But I make them in these blocks of 12, so I kind of work across the block. I quite like this idea of all these disparate films and disparate imagery sort of coming together to make a whole thing, rather than it being on one canvas. They're on separate bits of paper. But it's quite frustrating because often when I've shown the works, people don't show them in the right way. But you know, what can you do?
What do you think happens when you set them like that?
Well, when I look at them, I have this thing when I start to look at them, and I like my eye to kind of dart across, and there be points of interest that sort of carry it from one to the other. That's sort of when I know that it works for me. And I often remake a few of the individual paintings because they don't quite work for some reason. So that's kind of what I'm thinking of, and I sort of want them to be possibly part of the same story. They could maybe be put together to make one story, and they are because I watched them all. And so they are part of the story, and I picked them out from the films. So they become quite personal, and maybe they end up having little relationship to the film they were from anyway. In the end, after the colours are changed maybe, and they're recropped and whatever.
And do you know what it is about the images that you choose from those films? What is it you're looking for?
Well, sometimes I'm looking for images that will make a nice painting. I find that. But I watch the film often on my laptop, and I go through and take screenshots. And end up with a big file of images, and then I'll scroll through them, and I'll sort of think, oh yeah, these would all be nice, but I know all along the one that I really want to paint.
Yes.
There's always one that I've grabbed that I have in my mind.
Yes.
As the one that would be nice to paint.
Yes. It's amazing how, after a while, how your intuition can just get you to that.
Yeah. And it's hard to exactly pin down what it is.
Yes. I think there's often in your work there's quite quirky compositional things going on, which often do crop up in films, don't they? I mean, that's what film. And you don't get it very often in my work actually, but the kind of compositional things you get taken from films are very strange, foreshortenings and you know, vast people and huge close-ups and things like that.
Yeah, I enjoy that. I guess I also quite enjoy slightly provocative things sometimes to put in amongst a group. Maybe. I mean, you know, not hugely provocative, but...
Would that be then the head?
Maybe the head, maybe looking at that girl's skirt. I don't know. Just the kind of the men doing the beefcake. I mean, I'm not saying they're hugely provocative, but I don't want it all to be straightforward or particularly nice. Yeah, and often things that I kind of recognise maybe from places I've been, like the Bluebird Cafe is a place in Nashville that was in effect country music.
Yes.
Yes.
It comes on the TV series Nashville quite a lot, doesn't it?
Did you watch that?
I did before it went off to a different channel.
Okay. I love that series. It's very cheesy.
It's great, isn't it? Lovely music.
Yes.
I think Gillian Welsh wrote some of that music.
I think at the beginning they had really good songwriters.
Did. And that girl Scarlett got a lovely voice, and the man Gunnar.
Yes.
Yeah. Great.
That's so great. I've never met anybody else who's watched Nashville before.
Not who admits to it.
Well, maybe that's it.
I don't normally admit to it, especially in front of loads of strangers.
And it's recorded for posterity. So this seems like a good image to refer to. This
music image.
Yeah.
Aretha Franklin, yes.
Which seems quite different from, well, we don't have the landscape going on. It's
no.
Portrait. How big is that painting?
It's small.
Right.
Some of them were bigger. It's painted on this birch ply panel, which is a beautiful surface. So that's how you can see sort of watermarks coming through. And I think, you know, in my practice, you get various strands going along. I always felt that if people, particularly say sculptors or installation artists now, can say, well, I do a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of the other. As a painter, you know, I feel I want the same freedom to be able to do a series of portraits plus then, you know, another strand of work which takes a different kind of technique, if you call it that, you know, it's a different way of working.
So do you go back to this series? Is it?
For the period of time I was working on these, which was about 2014, I would have been working on another couple that are in here that were more, you know, sort of the kind of things I'm more known for, probably. But it was important for me to be doing these. I don't know, I may have done about 15 of them, and I may well go back to doing some. I suppose I've got a long-term interest in depicting women who have not necessarily fitted into sort of stereotypical women's roles, and there have been writers in this series and musicians. Just trying to think if there's, but there are other kinds of activities that women have taken part in that I want to work with in the future. And I know you did some kind of thing. Was it an Archie or Garage Landing on Difficult Women?
Oh yes.
Well, these were quite awkward women. I remember Nikki Hodge came to the studio to write a piece at that time, and she said, "Oh, it would make a wonderful dinner party with these women." And I said, "Not my dinner party," you know, because they were kind of, you know, who would want Patricia Highsmith and Nina Simone at a dinner party? I mean, just
Nina Simone would be picking a fight with everybody, wouldn't she?
And so would Patricia Highsmith. And I think Patricia Highsmith, I really like. She was, you know, she must have had some kind of personality disorder or something, and she had this fetish about snails.
Oh really?
And I believe that I read her biography of her once. She moved to Switzerland and she had pet snails, and so she had to take them with her, and she put them inside her coat, and she went on the plane with all these snails inside her coat. So you've got this woman at a dinner party who's going to have snails falling out of her sleeves.
You wouldn't serve snails, and that would be bad.
That would be sacrilegious to a woman like Patricia Highsmith. Yeah, so that's Aretha Franklin. So, and there's Gillian Welsh was in one of the women. Elizabeth Jane Howard and Patricia Highsmith. Karen Dalton. I don't know if anyone knows these people.
No, I don't know.
Karen Dalton's great. She's sort of similar era to Bob Dylan and respected by him.
But this idea of difficult women is quite interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, I edit 2 magazines, so I've got some copies here that people can look at afterwards. And this issue, Garashan, just came out, and it was actually guest edited by an art historian I've met called Arlene Leese, and it was her idea to do difficult women. And the difficult, she was very definite about, had to be in brackets. So
right.
It's not difficult women, it's difficult women. You know, I don't really quite know how that works, but...
Well, I suppose what she's saying is that they're being called difficult by a society because they're not fitting in.
Yes.
I don't even know that I'd go that far. And, you know, because I think we can be difficult, you know, we can properly be grumpy and bad-tempered and...
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting subject, and people, the contributors, kind of went in quite different directions with it. It's not sort of straightforwardly women that you might immediately think of as being difficult. Which, you know, makes for a more interesting mix. Like there's a piece on a film starlet called Tuesday Weld.
Oh yes,
who's quite.
She
was in an Elvis film, Wild and Country.
Okay.
She didn't do any great films. And I did a painting of Joan Crawford, who I think would definitely be a difficult woman under most people's definitions.
Strange, isn't she? She's got a look that is so out of time now.
Yes.
I can't imagine that she would be a star now.
Yeah, she's quite masculine looking, isn't she? She was meant to have had teeth removed to give her better cheekbones.
Right.
She was very, very determined to be a star.
Yeah.
She'd do everything she could.
She'd had some quite nefarious early life.
Yes. Yeah, she'd had a very bad childhood.
Have you ever considered yourself a difficult woman?
Not particularly, but maybe I am. Because maybe us difficult women don't consider ourselves difficult. You know, if you're just doing what you want to be doing, then I'm sure there are people that...
You've never got the sense that you were being considered difficult?
No, I don't think so. How about you?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Maybe I should make more of an effort to be difficult.
I wouldn't bother if it's not. It's not very nice when I know I was at college when I was a student. I look back with some sort of shame. And so I was very bolshy when I first went to college because I felt, for a start, I didn't really know who I was, and then. You know, I have thought about this, given that we've come to talk here. At that time, which was the 70s, it was such a male, you know, lots of female students, but lecturers were all male, and they were very quick to take advantage of the students they liked. But you never felt that when you were at college, because I think you went to college, you were more a mature student.
Yes, I was a mature student, so I didn't... I was in my mid-30s, I think, when I did my BA. So maybe I was, you know, that little bit older, so I didn't have that experience.
Yeah.
Probably if I had gone when I was in my early 20s, I'm sure it would have been very, very different. But One of the things when we were talking ahead of this conversation, you mentioned the F word.
Oh yes,
feminism. So, what are your thoughts?
Well, I thought it was interesting because I think feminism has come up with it's sort of in the air. We call it feminisms, really, in the air now. But I was thinking about our practices and how much your work has been about looking at women and looking at women's clothes. And you mentioned a while back about the films and looking at the huge faces. And I immediately thought of Laura Mulvey, the visual pleasure thing, where this idea that a woman goes to the cinema, as far as I remember, it's a long time ago I read it, but goes to the cinema and she wants to identify with this woman.
Well, the idea, yes, I think her visual pleasure thing, I mean, it's quite complicated, but basically what she was saying is that films were made by men for men, so the women on the screen were being presented for the male gaze, for the male pleasure. But as a woman, if you watch the film and you enjoy it, you are in effect becoming some kind of transvestite. That is her thought, that you actually switch your kind of. It's not. I don't think you identify.
I seem to remember it that the experience was thinking of yourself as that character.
Well, I think that's what happens, but I don't know that that's what she was saying at that time. Maybe because she did then write an extra bit.
Might be that bit.
So she might have thought a bit more about that, because I know there were. I mean, it was an amazing essay and completely groundbreaking. But I think she realised there were some shortcomings with the ideas.
Yeah.
But when you do watch those films, the camera does sort of almost eat up these images of these beautiful women. I always think of Rita Hayworth in The Lady from Shanghai, where she's got blonde hair and her face is shimmering and her clothes are shimmering, and she's just, oh my God, she's so beautiful. And it was made by her husband, ex-husband. So there was something going on there where he just wanted to present this beautiful trophy that he had in this way. So there is. I often do think about what am I doing by painting these women. I mean, I'm drawn to the images. I find them irresistible.
You're very drawn to beauty.
I'm very drawn. Well, I'm very interested in beauty. Yeah, I do actually find. I try and paint ugly things sometimes, and I find it really quite hard.
Don't bother then.
Sometimes in the film diary painting, I can do an ugly something, and it's kind of fine because it's amongst a bigger composition. But I would, I do struggle with it. There's something, and I've been looking a lot at what beauty is and how we can define beauty. And it's quite a strange concept, really. If you're thinking about beauty in terms of beautiful women, what is it that actually makes somebody beautiful? It's sort of one of those things that we think we all recognise, but how do you define it? And it's very, very hard to do.
But there's certain people that they talk about the camera loves certain people, so there's a kind of beauty which is translatable.
Yes, but what is it? I mean, that's sort of one of the things, because I'm doing a PhD at the moment in film studies, and I'm looking at the construction of the star image, female star image, and makeup and beauty. And usually people end up by saying, well, they were very charismatic. And that doesn't explain anything. It's so hard to actually, work out what is it that makes Elizabeth Taylor or Rita Hayworth or Marilyn Monroe, what is it that they actually have?
I remember hearing somebody who photographed Marilyn Monroe quite a lot saying that she was very hairy. Have you heard that?
I have. I think Eve Arnold says it.
Right.
She says that Marilyn had downy hair over her face, and that it caught the light somehow and made her have this amazing glow. I don't believe that at all. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm very.
I think that's.
I mean, I love all those romantic ideas, but I'm very sort of disbelieving of most of those.
It's like velvety, like a peach.
Yeah, but if you look at pictures of her, that doesn't appear to be so.
No.
You also read that she covered her face in Vaseline before putting her makeup on.
That was to keep the hair down.
Maybe, but she would just look like a big greasy. I mean, I know she had like a sheen to her face, but I just can't believe that either. All these sort of bits of misinformation, I quite love it. They get built into, you know, these iconic stories that, like Eve Arnold or Norma Mailer will say things, and then of course the next person that comes on will report what they say, and then it becomes true.
And that's sort of make a whole load of paintings based on
Mary's fairy face.
Yes, fictitious.
I just imagine it being like a tennis ball now.
I think what I was thinking of when I was thinking of this very, very different approach that we have to this subject matter in a way, is that I found beauty very difficult to deal with. And I think I came from an era when, at college, when I was doing my BA, we didn't do, painting was a really poor relation. And we did a lot of kind of rolling about in leaves. And it was Joseph Boyce was the man. And so there's a lot of that going on. And that you might, the idea of beauty or visual pleasure, you know, the worst thing anyone could say is it's decorative, it's decorative. So, you know, it's a very sort of a hangover, it's quite male hangover thing. Yes. And I was brought up by quite puritanical parents who, you know, you didn't look at yourself, or I was brought up to feel very awkward about how I looked. So it took me, I was probably in my 40s before I really twigged that painting was about looking at something and that it could be visual pleasure. Because I think before that I was, thinking my paintings and logically working out my paintings, but we weren't told that the next step is an aesthetic one. So I thought if you got all the bits in place, you would have made a good painting, because it was logically all correct, which is in a way the way we were taught at college was to be able to justify every part of it, and somehow if you could justify every part of it, you'd made a good work, but of course you hadn't. And then I began to think why I had so sort of massively avoided the way my paintings looked. I think it's about that time that I go to looking at other images and I begin focusing much more on what things look like. But it's still not anything like your practice, which comes from outside. And I know I read this idea about the blind spot, and that there might be, that we can never actually see ourselves. And I think my work is from the opposite direction. It sort of stems from trying to find out what it feels like to be female. And I remember that being something I sort of began to trouble me when I was, maybe late 20s, early 30s. I think actually, what does it actually feel like to be female? I'd been in a relationship with a man, and we had been very equal. And I sort of felt I'd lost touch with anything that was actually female about me, if there had ever been anything. So in a way, then it began being a quest to find out.
Sort of essence or something.
I don't know what, but it never was about how it was to look.
Right. Because I think that realised sort of fairly recently that I'm actually interested in the surface, that I want to look at the surface and how that maybe says something about more than the surface, or maybe it doesn't, but just, you know, taking the surface very, very seriously, which I think is quite a female thing. There's a fantastic book by somebody called Rosalind Galt called Pretty, and in it she just goes through all these examples of how pretty, the idea of pretty, which she decides is the most derogatory term, rather than beautiful, which has some kind of higher ideas with classicism and things. Pretty is just almost an insult if you tell somebody they're pretty. It's what little girls are. It's ribbons and bows and fripperies and...
You used to paint a lot of ribbons and things,
Yes, I do like ribbons. So she's trying to elevate it. She's trying to say, actually, we should look at all of these things. They are, or they could be, serious. Why can't we consider them as being as important as, I don't know, cars and you know, just things that men tend to be more associated with.
Well, I don't think they're very important either, are they? Cars.
Well, I don't know why I thought of cars. I was really stupid example. But more masculine things anyway. And I really love that idea. And actually, I did this issue of Artie called Oh You Pretty Things, which was all about considering pretty and trying to make pretty a serious subject, which it probably won't ever be, but I think it's an interesting idea. Why can't we, you know, look at the makeup that Joan Crawford wore in the same way that we might look at an old master painting and sort of think about the technique she used? And
there's a painting, isn't there, on your website, Max Factor Magic.
Yes.
Which has that finger coming in, and then it's almost like a Damien Hirst with these
with the
pots of paint.
Yes, those makeup adverts, which is what that sort of is inspired by, are kind of amazing. The mid-century makeup adverts with all those colours that are very particular to that era. We were talking about Technicolor, weren't we, earlier? So that idea of it being this makeup being a creative medium. I mean, I know at the moment there is a whole industry of young people who are on Instagram and just take pictures of their own face in amazing, different makeups and can kind of make a living by doing that. So maybe it has become, this subculture. Something else I'm very interested in, subcultures, things which are sort of a bit underground. It is becoming something of an art form. I worked as a makeup artist as well, sort of full disclosure. So, makeup artist, it does have artist attached to it. So
did you, when you went in to be a makeup artist, did you imagine that you would then ditch the makeup and become an artist?
Well, I kind of wanted to be an artist before that, but I just didn't ever quite make it to art school. So the makeup was maybe just a thing that I could do at that time, but it was my substitute for painting.
Did you not make it to art school because you didn't have, because once you'd started on that career you didn't have a chance really to build up a portfolio? Or?
Yeah, I just couldn't decide what I wanted to do when I was younger, and I just kept changing my mind, so I didn't ever get a very good amount of work in the portfolio. I did go to an interview, I seem to remember, somewhere. Maybe it was in Kingston, and I didn't get in. And then I was in a band, and so I just did that.
I didn't know you were in a band.
Yes, I was in a band. I used to sing. So we did a tour.
What was the name of your band?
We were called... Embarrassing. We were called Shoot! Dispute.
Shoot! Dispute.
80s, mid-80s, late 80s.
I'll have to talk a bit more about that, because I've got some experience of that.
Okay. Well, we did John Peel sessions, so we kind of did okay for a little bit. So that's why I don't need to go to university. I'm going to be a rock star. So that's why that happened.
I was just thinking of what you said about surface, because I had this sort of idea a while back about how there's the northern tradition in painting. Realism was achieved through attention to surface. So someone like Dürer or Holbein, it's all kind of about the texture of the fabric. And this is a kind of I think it's sort of connected. It's a great book by Svetlana Alpers, The Art of Describing. She says that the whole of art. The book was written probably in the 90s, but she was saying the whole canon of art history has been about the more sort of Roman tradition, or the Italian tradition of structure, and I think there were sort of rules, weren't there, for how you showed draperies. And if you think of I'm just trying to think of who even Michelangelo say, texture of draperies isn't something he bothers with. You get simple colours, and it's the sculptural thing of the folds of the draperies. Whereas if you look at the northern tradition, you get the fur painted, and really you get a human form isn't that important. You get the head, and then you get these wonderful colours and
like
jewels and
those
things like
portraits of Elizabeth I,
yes,
which are all about the clothes, aren't they?
Yes.
The sumptuous clothes,
Yes.
and her face is kind of quite
yes,
flat and
yes.
yeah.
And I used to think there was something about this idea that godliness was in this detail. And I think with the other, there's kind of truth. The idea is almost like platonic truth in this structure that underlies things.
I love that idea that all of those classical white marble sculptures, all the Greek and Roman things, were not actually white.
No.
That's so fantastic when you see those images of them painted and they're all kind of lurid and decorative.
Yeah.
It changes things quite a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's all part of the same thing, yeah.
So I picked out this painting of yours, which I find really interesting because, the title of it, which I imagine comes from Taxi Driver.
No. That's interesting. That's very interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
Well, I did think it was strange because Taxi Driver has got Jodie Foster and
Robert De Niro.
So it doesn't quite make sense.
Quite.
Actually, Jodie's not spelled the same either.
Yeah.
But I just thought that it maybe had some illusion.
Yeah, I hadn't actually realised that it's actually about quite a tacky and very sad murder that really did happen. Travis Alexander and Jodie Arias. And that's what I mean about doing kind of various groups of paintings, all going on at the same time, a sort of group of paintings where I'm sort of inspired by this story. But I think the story, she fell in love with this guy and he messed her about and never was serious about her. And she absolutely was obviously besotted with him. And he had some fantasy about her being Red Riding Hood. I know that was why she ends up kind of walking through the wood. But she ended up murdering him.
Oh, she murdered him?
She murdered him. And she's in prison now for that. But some people say that she was led to it because he treated her so badly. And I'm quite interested in fact, I'm doing some work in my studio about this. There's this sort of feminine passion.
Right.
And the idea of the harpy or the Eumenides, this kind of beyond reason kind of wildness that Jodie must have felt to do what she did.
And yeah, the Red Riding Hood image is just such a strong visual thing, isn't it? I mean, it occurs so often in films. And,
Yes, yeah.
I love that film, The Ice Storm. I don't know if anyone's seen it.
Sigourney Weaver.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's got Christina Ricci in it,
Yes.
and she plays the young girl, and she wanders off with her red. I don't know if it's a cloak or a coat with a hood, but it's a very definite reference, and she gets rescued by her dad, who kind of kills her.
And why did you paint?
Here's my. It's quite an old painting, but I just couldn't resist putting it there. Well, this was a series that I did. I mean, I actually love working in series. You were talking about your series, and I just like having all these parts making up a bigger idea, I think. Or organising. I like organising things, and this seems to be a way to do it.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
And this was from a series called Patch Girls, and they are all paintings of this doll called Patch, who was Cindy's little sister.
I remember that, yes.
I think I just came across one of them somewhere, and it just, you know, when you find those objects and it takes you straight back to your childhood, and I just was, oh, God, I'd forgotten all about her, these amazing outfits she had. So she was Red Riding Hood, she had her swimming costume, her hockey outfit, her brownie outfit, all these.
She had a horse.
Ballet. She had a pony, yeah. So all these things that a little girl of the 1960s, 70s could be.
Yes.
Those were the, there weren't that many options, but Red Riding Hood was one of them.
We all aspired to.
And she had a little plastic basket with plastic fruit in it that went with it that I didn't paint for some reason.
So did you have a patch?
I did when I was little, and then but then I bought loads more from eBay to do these paintings.
Yes, wonderful.
So we do have a collection of them now. And this series had, I think there were about 8 I did. Quite big for me, so 1 metre 22 high, so definitely bigger than Patch in real life, because she's
strange,
only
It's
this big.
quite uncanny to see her blown up to that height.
Yes, they were quite weird.
She has a slightly uncanny face. And
Well,
the Cindy's had all that lot, they had their eyes painted on, didn't they? They didn't have...
You could get Cindy
Blinking
with
ones.
closing eyes. There's a special closing eyes one, but usually they're painted on,
Yeah.
yes. But dolls are uncanny, aren't they?
They
Generally.
are, yes.
And I heard this really interesting thing about Disney animation and in the early Disney films. So in Snow White, the very first Disney feature, they had lots of problems drawing the prince because he had to be a handsome man. And all their other characters, so Snow White and the dwarves and the animals, they can exaggerate their features.
Yes.
There's big, huge eyes. All the women have bigger heads than they would have in real life. And so they kind of look cute and friendly. But with the handsome prince, they had to make it look like a handsome prince. And so on screen, he's really creepy. and I hadn't really thought about it, but it's really true. And then, in fact, they had to cut most of his scenes out of the film because he was scaring all the children. So he's hardly in it. And they didn't attempt another handsome prince for 10 years until they made Cinderella. And I can't quite remember what he looks like in Cinderella. But it does seem to be a problem, making handsome men in cartoons.
Yeah, well. out of them as well.
But yeah, and part of it was that he had that uncanny feel to him, the prince, because they were trying to depict a real life handsome
Well,
man.
because he has to smile a lot, doesn't he? And that's a bit weird, because a very smiley man goes against our culture when handsome men don't smile like that unless they're trying to do something not very nice.
Yes, maybe that's it.
Did you know that I did lots of paintings from Disney princes?
No.
I think there was 1 or 2 that were shown at Transition in 2008-ish, but and I can say that because a friend of mine who's a poet was on the train yesterday and he texted me and he said, I'm looking at your painting, Prince Blue Quiff, and where does that come from? And I told him that I'd done a series of Disney princes, and he asked why I'd done them, and I said because I was sort of being ironic about the way, we, women, and I, just like any other, or at least like me, get brainwashed into looking for our prince.
Yes.
And so I've done all these different princes that were all kind of distorted and a bit weird. And then I realised when I was texting him that I was in my studio and I'm actually working on Disney princesses at the moment.
Ah.
Yeah.
So which Disney princesses?
Oh God, I don't know. They're all the
I
same,
see.
aren't they?
Okay.
They're all the same, and I mean,
Well,
they wouldn't be to you.
They've changed a bit more recently,
Yeah.
haven't they, in the way they look?
But these are all from colouring books, recent colouring books.
Okay.
And yes, what is shocking, absolutely shocking, is that in these colouring books, they're the occasional, they throw in the occasional one about Princess such and such, Princess Meghan likes painting, something like that. And then, but mostly it's just pictures of princesses being proposed to.
Oh, that's terrible.
It's,
I thought that the big Disney thing now was that the princesses were had got more of their own identity, and it wasn't just about finding the prince.
well, I haven't seen any for a long time.
I haven't really. I just hear about them.
Yeah. I wonder if it's just in context they seem like that, but I certainly noticed in these colouring books that sort of 75% of it is them being taken on a picnic by Prince Charming and stuff.
That's very, very sad.
Yeah, and that's what I've hoped for all my life.
Being taken on a picnic.
Yeah, and it's never really happened. And I think that accounts for my disappointment in life. And I wouldn't have been a painter. In all seriousness, I wouldn't have been a painter if I'd been taken on picnics.
Oh.
Enough.
I think picnics generally are disappointing.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
I don't think I've been on enough to know.
So I'm very interested in this painting. I don't know anything about it.
Yes. So it's the title is, I don't speak Kikuyu, not to say, but it's a Kikuyu wedding song. And I almost put in another painting from 2012. This painting was 2016, I think. But there's there's a group of paintings that came from, more around 12, 13, 14, which were actually, those ones were kind of inspired by the Occupy movement and this sense of resistance and people standing up against things. So the earlier painting, there's one called Men of Cornwall and another called Cutting the Wren that came from sort of things like molly dancing, things like that, these sort of ritualised demonstrations of workers. What's it called? Plough Monday, where the ploughman used to go up and tear up the master's garden with a plough if he didn't cough up. So the paintings around this time were moving into an area which has continued, which has been a bit more about imperialism, and so this is a kind of revolt painting, really, and it was an image I found. I've put it in a different context, and it gets changed by the painting process, but it was inspired by.
You talked earlier about how you started by planning paintings. You were saying when you started painting at college, you thought about the components and how they went together rather than the image. Did I get that wrong? I'm just wondering, I guess, how much you plan the painting before you start. Obviously, you have your image that you're painting from?
I think a thing about my practice, which is not such a common thing, is that I start with ideas rather than, I think, a lot of painters come, the way painting made its way back into the mainstream in the last, I don't know how many years, since the 90s or something like that, was by taking images and almost stripping them of their meaning and looking at them as surfaces. So when you showed your group of paintings, I was thinking, what happens when you show 12 small paintings of fragments is that the narrative that exists is disrupted, so you end up with this kind of strange, not sure what's happening, and then the space is there for you to construct a narrative of your own. And I think my move has been away from that, because mine starts with ideas, and I feel very driven by an idea, and then I begin looking at images that I might be able to incorporate into this idea. And again, referring back to that one that you showed of the multiple images, and in what you said about liking the idea of working in series and then presenting the series, as I'm moving towards trying to make a painting that has all that stuff going on in it, rather than making a series of paintings. Having said that, I don't know that that would be the case in this painting, but it's becoming more and more so that there'll be sort of multiple things happening.
Yes. Well, I think you can see that in them generally, that there's a lot of different kinds of painting.
Yes, that's right.
Different things going on. You've got the figures, you've got the landscape.
Yes.
All these things are sort of
I like the idea of a kind of restlessness and a slight edge of chaos in the way that space is made up and the way people are in that space. And that's another way I think in which we differ, because you're working so much from the photograph, you're working within that convention of the single viewpoint and the horizon, whereas I'm trying to cut that up, because I'm interested in a kind of reality that is much more subjective.
Right. So, yeah, that makes sense. So the idea that you would have started with this painting was about these groups of people? No. That
was a surprise to me, to realise that I was back in that territory, and that territory of the uprising against something, I realised was related to what I said earlier about the tyranny of the image and the tyranny of expectation on me, that there's this constant identification, although people might find it odd to think it, but I sort of identification with people attempting to break through what's expected of them. So I think that's a theme that continually rumbles along, that sort of sense of oppression, fighting oppression. But this painting is more to do with, as I say, this idea of imperialism, which in itself is a fighting of oppression. But I've only just begun to touch in on what it's been about, this subject, that has kind of kept me going.
So while you're making the painting, all of these thoughts are developing.
It's like the process of painting is my investigation into why I'm thinking these things.
Yes.
So I'm working intuitively, sort of knowing by the strength of the feeling that there is some connection here that I've got to find out.
Yeah. I think that we maybe have nearly spoken for long enough, but I just wanted to talk about this.
Oh, yeah.
And
I know you've done it.
So,
have you got a Douglas Sirk one in there as
yes,
well?
that's what I was just trying to find.
Yeah.
So this painting of Eleanor's, she told me earlier, is inspired by a Douglas Sirk film, who is a director, film director, and one of my favourite directors, who made these very lavishly coloured melodramas in the 1950s that were very, very popular, and they often starred Rock Hudson, and they could seem to be quite kind of shallow, but actually he was very subversive, and he was critiquing the American system. He was German, and talking about the sort of excess materialism of America and the breakdown of families and all of that kind of thing. And this one is inspired by
All That Heaven
All That
Allows.
Heaven Allows. Yeah. And this is Rock Hudson, which I'm absolutely fascinated by.
And Jane Wyman in the middle, getting ready for a party. And it's interesting you use the word melodrama, because I don't know if there's a couple of others in here. If you, there's this one, for instance. There were a few paintings that I was doing which were inspired actually by pre-Raphaelite paintings.
Okay.
And what I was getting at in the pre-Raphaelite things is the sense of melodrama in them.
Yeah.
And that's how I was sort of thinking, I mean, I do love those Douglas Sirk paintings, actually.
I mean, that's my Douglas Sirk one. That's from Written on the Wind.
Is that the one where it's got the daughter who does that very sexy dance with the bongo?
That's her in the mirror, the
I
daughter.
thought that must be
She does this crazy dance as her dad's having a heart attack downstairs.
Because she's just wild, isn't
Yeah.
she? She's like Jodie Arias. She's just a wild woman that's gone bad.
Yeah, she's gone very bad. I love bad women on screen. They're my favourite category. But there is something about his films that is very much fits into this sort of pretty, over, everything's exaggerated, and the decor. In this film, when she's doing the dance, she has these amazing, really garish flowers, bright red, sort of tropical flowers around her, and she's wearing white and doing this dance.
So it's his symbolism. I mean, those red flowers will be there for a very good reason.
Absolutely, everything is decided upon and chosen. But when I was doing this, I was very much thinking about looking in mirrors and reflections, and how women in films, when they look in mirrors, are generally being narcissistic and self-absorbed. But if men look in mirrors, they're preparing themselves for something important.
Yes.
There's quite a different demarcation. But they're also fantastic devices for showing the back and the front of somebody's head at the same time.
And a huge range, the huge size of the close-up head.
Another mirror.
Yes. With that big arm that you've got coming in.
So I kind of started to do lots of mirror things.
Yeah.
Which, actually, interestingly, at the moment at Transition, the gallery I run, we've got a show by two artists, Owen Parry and Beth Richards, which is about fandom and fan cultures. And they have this sort of weird installation thing they've made, a tube which has the mobile phone images embedded in it. And at the end there's an empty slot. And Owen said to me, we were going to put a mirror in there, but we just thought, oh my God, that's so cliche in 1970s. And I was like, oops. They've been doing so many things with mirrors, it really put me in my place. But I did think, it just kind of goes to show that somebody's cliche is not a cliche for somebody else.
Or maybe putting a mirror is slightly different, isn't it, than the image of a mirror? Because once you're dealing with imagery, in a way, mirrors are very, very close to imagery, aren't they? Because that's you
Yeah.
seeing yourself as an image.
But I love reflective images of paintings, as we've been. And just
surface.
The surface is, there's nothing more surface than a mirror. So yes, I'm aware that it's 7:20, so I think we've been talking for about an hour.
Yeah.
So it'd be really nice if anybody does have anything they want to ask, but don't feel like you have to if you can't think of anything. It's completely
Sometimes when
optional.
people talk a huge amount, you're
like, oh my god, I can't think of anything. But yes, and also I do have some magazines here that you can look at, and you can actually buy them as well, just in case anybody.
Can I ask you something?
Yes.
How often do you buy new brushes?
Oh, well, that's very practical. Well, I'm very mean, and I hate to spend money on things if I don't need to. So I use them, and I've got this awful brush that I've been using, and then I'll eventually think, oh God, I'd better go get a new brush. And then it's so amazing for a few
Yes.
minutes.
The joy of a new brush.
That was the problem I had.
Yes.
Using that horrible
That's
brush.
right, because you get a brush and it's got all these little bits sticking out of it,
Yes.
and you don't think that, gosh, that needs to go.
No.
You just get it, just
Carry on, and it
irritates
gets
you.
harder and
Yeah.
horrible.
Yeah.
So,
Anybody else have any thoughts on how often they buy brushes?
are most of you painters that are here, or
Well, the way people are not painters are just going to not know what we're talking about.
They become your own after a while. If you've had the paintbrush for 10 years, it's got its own little idiosyncrasies.
Oh, yes, maybe. You obviously look after your paintbrushes better.
I'm mean as well.
Yeah. I think I never wash them as well as I should, clean them as well as I should.
But if you clean them really well, I find they lose their sort of bounce anyway.
Yeah.
So
The thing is to keep on using them every day, and then they're fine. It's when you leave them for a couple of weeks and go back to them, and then they're just awful.
yeah.
I think I'm quite attached to them. I don't think I've ever thrown away a paintbrush.
Really?
Not like a nice one. If I'm going to do something awful with it, then I'll just use a really cheap one and do it.
Yes.
But yeah, I've got paintbrushes that I've had for, gosh, over maybe 20 years. Maybe.
Oh.
Like from when I think, like a lot, where I just, can't get rid of them.
And if they're really big ones that you've had for a long time, I mean, they are the
they're
worst for
expensive.
being completely unusable.
Yeah, but I think when you said they just become this thing with their own,
Yeah.
your favourite ones or something. Even if they're unusual, even if I didn't use them.
Maybe
they're
they
just
do.
there.
Yeah, they do develop their own particular thing that you wouldn't get if you bought a new one.
Yeah, but new ones are fabulous now.
I love a new brush.
Yes.
You get them and go, how have I not had them, have I functioned without them?
Cathy, I've got a question
Oh, yeah.
about the film still series.
Yes.
What happens if you re-watch a film? Do you have to make a new painting, or do you, how does
Yes.
that work?
I like setting up very strict things for myself. So I have actually got a little book that I write down every film I watch and the date and where I watch it. Because that helps me remember it if I write down where I've watched it. And then if I watch it again, I'll make another painting from it. And I kind of quite like looking back on some of those film diary paintings because they're chronological. And there might have been a time when I had a little bit of an obsession about a film. I did really like the first Twilight film. It's another embarrassing confession.
First what?
Twilight.
Oh, yeah.
Vampires.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched it about 10 times over the course of a couple of months. So I had to keep painting different images from it till I'd exhausted almost everything that I could find that was interesting in the film.
But does that ever put you off watching a film because you think, I don't want to have to paint that again?
No,
Or is it
not
the
really.
opposite?
I mean, I could cheat, couldn't I? I could do whatever I like. In fact, when I do watch a film and then when the image appears that I painted, it's kind of slightly strange moment.
You must have a certain relationship with
Yes,
it.
because I've looked at
Yes.
it so hard, I guess.
That must be strange.
It's quite nice. It makes me, completely remember the painting and when I was doing it.
Is it like seeing a friend in a film?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Yes.
Does it make you feel like you're kind of putting yourself into the film as well, or is it kind of more about admiring it?
I think, I mean, the thing that you were saying about the visual pleasure, how you imagine you are the person in the film. I don't know if I imagine I'm in the film, but I think if you're watching a film and you get into it, as we might say, you do enter into the film world, don't you? You sort of, you know, you come, especially if you go to the cinema, I think, where everything else is turned off and you just have to focus on the screen. So you do enter into it when you're watching the film, and I think painting, I really enjoy it because it does really make me think about the film and consider it from a visual point of view, just think about things about it. So I don't know if I enter into it exactly, but there's definitely some very particular relationship that goes on. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I've got a question, if that's all right. First of all, thank you for being so honest, and as I've sat here, I kind of feel like I'm overhearing a conversation in a pub or on the train that I shouldn't be listening to, which is, I think, a big compliment to you both. But I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing perhaps some kind of key moments in your professional journey as artists that might include, you know, whether they're positive or not, that you feel were just kind of important somehow.
That's a good question, isn't it? A good thing.
Shall I go first?
Yes.
Okay. So I think it's true that there are moments that really do, for me, that kind of make me continue almost. You know, things that happen that kind of, you know, you're getting a bit down, you're kind of making your work and you feel like nobody's that interested, and then something will happen and it sort of does give you that little bit of energy. I think one of the things for me that's been key throughout my practice has been running a gallery and having that engagement with other artists and having that sort of ongoing thing of just having to sort of look at other people's work and think about how they make the work and talking to them about how they want to display them. Just all of that kind of has been really important all the way along. And then things that have happened, because then sometimes I feel like my own practice gets a bit buried underneath that. So it's nice when things happen that are about my practice. And when I went to the British School at Rome, that was really important because I always think that maybe I'm not that good or something. I don't know, not good enough or not interesting enough. And so when you get that recognition, I'm always shocked. I'm like, oh my God, I can't. That just happens to people that I think are amazing. How can that have happened to me? So that was fantastic. The actual experience of being there at the time was actually quite hard, but in retrospect, I think it was really, really good. And then I won a prize. So winning prizes of any kind, I think, are just great. I won the Contemporary British Painting Prize, which again I was just completely shocked to win, and that's been really nice. So I think those things that I just can think of immediately.
I didn't work in London for a long time, and when I came out of college, I hadn't done my degree.
Where did you do your degree?
I did my BA at Exeter, and I did an MA in art history and theory in Birmingham, and then I did a long time later. I mean, both MAs were a long time later. I did them in Chelsea as well. So I worked in a barn in rural Berkshire with my boyfriend. He was a sculptor. He had the ground downstairs, and I had the upstairs. I had to climb a ladder to get into this barn. And I had quite a bit of sort of hopeful stuff going on right at the beginning. And then I moved to Nottingham, and it took a long time to build up the same kind of interest in Nottingham, but got to a point in Nottingham where there was beginning to be interest. And at that point, I really felt I had to leave and come to London. So that would be an important thing. So I came to London, I was kind of like starting again. And I think I was very lucky to be able to do the Masters at Chelsea. If I hadn't done that, I don't think my work would have shifted on enough for me to start getting anything. And then it took a few years after that for any interest. I'm very slow. I think it's kind of, I don't have much of the paraphernalia that makes me sort of hip and trendy. So, but one thing that comes to mind that was very important in my career was, and this is probably sounds a bit down, but at a certain point I thought, oh God, why do I try so hard and never get anywhere? And what's going wrong? And I went into an analysis for quite a long time. And that was extremely helpful. And I remember one thing happening about that time. I was invited, do you remember Leanne Barber?
Yes.
Who used to run this gallery? That would be about the first time I started showing in London. She was quite good. This American woman came and opened this gallery, which had a very open policy. Everybody could put in. She tried to be very inclusive. And for a short while this gallery ran, and she let me sort of take part. This was, having come to London late, quite old, I found it very, very hard to, and it wasn't so much internet stuff then, so I found it very hard, I felt very excluded from the whole scene. I'm very shy. But she was friendly, and she encouraged me. And about the same time I put something in, and that got into your, I think you did a
with
show,
her,
didn't
with-
you? That's right,
yes.
Bittersweet or something.
Acid drops and sugar
Yeah.
candy.
that thought of it as bittersweet. And she asked me to put this painting in. She chose it for something to be, a panel. And they rejected this painting. And I was so hurt. And it was the time that I was going to see this Jungian analyst, and I remember thinking about it. And this is so obvious to most people, but I wasn't very clever. And I thought, I've got two options here. I can just feel totally shit about having had this painting rejected, or I can try and see past my own projection onto the painting and try and look and see why was it rejected? What is wrong with this painting? Not why couldn't they see this painting, but what is wrong with it? What is wrong with it? I need to know what is wrong with it so I can make my paintings better. And that was a kind of key thing, really. It was kind of a sort of moment of being strong enough to have enough humility to look at work and see, oh, actually, there's obviously something wrong with it, So that was an important thing for me.
That's really interesting.
Good question.
Very good question. I'm sure everybody's got interesting things.
I think it's really, for me, it's in London, I really appreciate it because I think often you can go and listen to artists talk about their practice, which is of course really insightful and interesting in itself, but then people rarely talk about, what happens that surrounds that allows them to sustain practice, especially somewhere like London where it's increasingly difficult. So I really, it's really interesting to hear because the journeys are long and
I think both of us, and you said it as well just then, it's not the case that you feel this is any sense of entitlement, because there's so much failure goes on. I never feel that I've had any success at all. And I remember speaking to a woman who's a very, very good painter, who's probably 15 years older than me, being very surprised to hear her say, being quite bitter about not having any success. And I thought, well, blimey, to me, she was a really respected woman, but she didn't feel it because you put in so much, and you know, in the end, nothing would ever recompense you for the amount you have to put in
No,
to
that's
this, I
true.
think.
That's quite.
That's a bit of a downer, isn't it? But the thing is, you get beyond that and you start thinking, I'm doing it because I want to do it. And what could be better than that?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Let's end on the positive.
Yes.
Okay, any last question? No? Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for talking to us this evening.